we get told, well, we don't live near such a busy road, so that's why we should tolerate all this dust. But yeah, obviously, yeah, Pete, do carry on, but thank you, Drew.
That's all right, cheers.
Right, thank you. Yeah, just to kind of reiterate a little bit with what Dreena's saying, and just to back her up, this isn't unique. We've just been through this with Westbury Estate as well, where people have been hospitalised because of the state of the air quality and the noise and the vibrations that people have been having to put up with right next to their bedrooms. So this isn't an isolated incident, and we do really need to take this very, very seriously, because as I'm just going to talk about is, you know, it's the dehumanisation of people on the estates and communities. So the community, there's so much going on here, but it's a process of degeneration. And what happened is, even before we knew that the estates were going to be demolished, Lambeth Council were running down the estates, and you know, they'd stopped doing sort of anything that was expensive in terms of repairs. We still, after 6 years on Fenwick Estate, Fenwick Estate, Cressingham and Central Hill, we do not have a master plan, despite being promised, and for Cressingham it's 8 years, despite being promised and actually working with providers of master plans. We've still not been able to get there. And now the problem with Truslove House is that it's kicking the can down the road another 3 years potentially. And whilst they're going to be demolishing Truslove House, which should be part of a master plan for the estate, we will be then working in parallel to develop a master plan, which won't start getting implemented for another 3 years. The timelines have not been held. They've not been held to account on their timelines on anything. And South Lambeth Estate and Dreena sort of backed that up completely. The lack of genuine engagement with residents has been mind-blowing for me. You know, it's not that difficult to at least reach out and try and engage with residents. And certainly on all of the estates that I've been working on, the council have been trying to work in isolation and dictating what should be happening on the estates. We had no idea about Roman Rise until they turned up one resident engagement meeting to say, well, this is what we're going to now deliver, and we've worked it all out for you. And from that initial plan, anything that we've said to try and challenge that through the consultation or the planning process, they've not touched, and hardly anything has changed since that first presentation about 18 months ago. And also, they've tried to bring this in under the cover of COVID, which in some respects, you know, it's meant that they've had to provide things online, but we have so many residents that don't even have email addresses, let alone get online. So it's, from an accessibility perspective, residents, especially the elderly residents, have not been able to get involved at all. And I think the situation with Fenwick Estate, where only 2 people objected, I think it says, you know, firstly that we managed to raise the Residents Association managed to work together to get almost 300 objections on Central Hill Estate. But if we hadn't have done that, we'd probably ended up with two objections as well, because they were keen to just rush this through under the cover of COVID, and they had done that. Our questions have not been answered fully, and you know, where we have raised questions, they've been batted back with sort of half answers, and certainly, as I say, nothing changes from what we bring up, and anything that we put in terms of ideas and input has been ignored. I mean, we do not want to see the trees felled that are around Truslove House. You know, we have got issues with traffic, pollution, and noise, you know, and the trees are there. They're a barrier to all of that. And the council just seems to be quite happy, instead of designing around those trees, which have been there at least 50 years, they just want to take them down. So dehumanization, I mean, people, they're not being treated like people. I mean, Dreena mentioned a few times decanting. You know, that's what you do to dirty wines. You clean you filter your wines by decanting it. And you know, the brownfield sites, the the sink estates, the housing units, not the homes. All of it is dehumanizing this process to make it easier to sell to people that aren't caught up in the middle of it, and also so I think to the developers themselves as well. And there's a kind of almost an inhumanity in the way that they treat the process of demolition and rebuild. One of the big factors is the breakup of the community, and we've seen, I think, over a third of the residents, the original residents on Central Hill Estate now being moved off and having their houses bought back off them. In the tenants that have moved off into those homes, they have moved in people in temporary accommodation. Oh, sorry, it's going to move on. They've moved people off the estate and moved in temporary accommodation. These are the people that I feel for the most. They are people who've probably been through, living in poor accommodation across Lambeth, and then they're coming to this estate and they're being treated like property guardians with no rights whatsoever. And then when the time comes to demolish their new home on the estate, they will just get moved off with no rights and no financial help to move off. And this is the lack of humanity is just astounding in terms of the treatment of the community and residents. So we've also had a problem with the disrepair. We've got a lot of genuine health and safety issues on the estate, but the council obviously don't want to invest a lot of money in it because they think it's going to be demolished in the coming years. But because we don't have a master plan, there is no clear plan for the housing team to come in and do the repairs that are necessary. So they're caught between a rock and a hard place in terms of if they don't know whether they've got to make these repairs last 20 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. So that really affects them and their ability to commit to sorting the estate out as well. So I'm not making excuses for them because it's the housing department that's put us in this position in the first place. Yeah, after 6 years, we still, residents are completely, still in the dark about what's happening on the estate. Today I delivered a leaflet about this meeting to one of the residents on the estate, and she's 80 years old. She's she's lost someone due to COVID. Her dog died, and it's heartbreaking. And then she's got no idea what's happening. And I think that, all of this disengagement from the community, the lack of real meaningful input from residents has meant that, we are seeing significant mental health issues along with the physical health issues. So I'm going to change topic completely now and look at the finances. Business plans. So once a year, every year now, Homes for Lambeth have been publishing a new business plan, which there's very little detail there to really pick apart, and that we can be reassured that they are based on sound figures and sound assumptions in terms of house prices, in terms of the numbers, and do they all add up. So, but there is a lot of political sort of spin, and we're going to cut down the number of people on the housing waiting list, which just is not going to happen. We know that Homes for Lambeth is planning on building almost 5,000 homes, 4,500 homes, but only 23% of them are going to be end up being at council rent. 60% are going to be at private sale. So if of those 60%, if they're out by 10, 20,000 pounds on each of those, that's a lot of money that we could be short at the end of 20 years of redevelopments and demolitions. So, we do challenge as Greens, we're challenging all the time. Residents are asking questions of the council, freedom of information requests, but it's really challenging. There's a distinct lack of transparency, and we have to go through a bit of a firewall between Lambeth Council and then to get to Homes for Lambeth. And so we do struggle to get information out, and then the information that we get is usually sort of the bare minimum from what we've asked. So yeah, so we're always going back for asking follow-up questions, which I think they find frustrating and the officers find frustrating. But you know, it's kind of their fault because we've not got the information up front. And to be honest, I don't think the plans stand up. And also we've got COVID at the moment, we've got Brexit. You know, the housing market is so uncertain at the moment, and you know, we need to be erring on the side of caution with all of this. And you know, I'll come on to the environmental impacts in a minute, but you know, we can't be making confident assertions about the prices and about the values of homes that we're going to be getting, or the costs of building them as well, especially when you think much of our labour comes from the European Union, you know, and how is that going to affect the costs of building? So the original justifications that were cited were that they were going to bring down the number of people in temporary accommodation. Homes for Lambeth is only going to, at best, replace what we currently own in terms of council housing in the estates. So I think the current figure, I've worked it out, is that we've got 1,076 homes that are going to be demolished that are now council owned. And they're only going to be building back 1,070. So from this point forward, we're going to be demolishing more homes than we're going to be rebuilding. So, sorry. Oh, God. So yeah, so and the other justification for demolishing and rebuilding was the HRA borrowing cap, which has now been lifted. So in my view, there should have been a huge you know, a reassessment, a complete reassessment of Homes for Lambeth and what it was there for and what it was trying to deliver, and the whole regeneration campaign. We've spent over £100 million so far on housing regeneration and Homes for Lambeth, and we have not demolished anything, and we've not yet built anything. So the only builds that have happened so far are Section 106 builds as a result of other bigger developments that never delivered this council housing that we need. And so just coming back to the final point there is that we just don't know what the financial assumptions that the council are using. So I'm going to move now on to the climate change and the environment. And this for me is just complete enough to greenwash. We know that Homes for Lambeth and planning departments and council as a whole is quite limited in the resources it's got to really understand what the climate emergency means, and how we need to kind of do what we can to get to carbon neutral. There are documents within the planning applications for all of the Regen estates that have gone in so far, which are looking at the climate emergency and net zero, but the new properties that they're planning to build are not being built to the proper standards, the necessary standards. There's no reference to passive house standards. They are not being built from the sort of from an environmental perspective upwards. They're not considering embodied carbon. So this is the carbon that's used in firing the bricks, in the making of the cement and concrete. And as it stands at the moment, we've got a huge amount of embodied carbon, especially in Central Hill Estate, where everything on Central Hill was over-engineered because of the Cold War, because of the threat of nuclear war. And we've got our nuclear bunker on the estate. And, so there is a huge amount of embodied carbon locked into Central Hill as it stands at the moment. And it's not going to fall down in any time soon, unless the council demolish it. It could stay here for another 50 or 100 years if it was looked after properly. But the embodied carbon's not being considered, the carbon life cycle's not being properly looked at. And and yes, the new homes may be slightly better standard than the existing ones in terms of energy efficiency, but that's not to say that you couldn't make these homes, retrofit them, refurbish them, and make them to a much, much higher standard at a fraction of the cost. So the other thing that I find really galling is the fact that because we're not building our homes or the new homes to the highest standards, Homes for Lambeth, who is borrowing all of the money that it's taking anyway from the council. It's borrowing the money from the council, who are in turn borrowing it from the Public Works Loans Board, from the government. Homes for Lambeth will be having to pay back to Lambeth Council a carbon offset tax of around £28,000 because the standards are not to a high enough standard. So, I mean, in the big scheme of things, £28,000 is not a lot of money when you're talking about £100 million. But the knock-on cost, though, is if we have to retrofit in 10 years' time to make these buildings carbon neutral, then then it'll cost a lot more to retrofit in 10 years' time than to build properly first time round and build it now. I'll leave it at that now. So I'll stop sharing my screen and you can see me, but I hope that was okay, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you. That was very informative. What we had next